Assalamu alaikum. Okay, bismillahirrahmanirrahim. I was saying that we had Mito's birthday present in the background. He's like this white, like racist dude kind of thing, like a big man that you put on a stand and you punch him. Because, Mito's 15 now and he likes to punch me, so I figured I should give him an alternative. And I put him up in the background for just a little humor because I think everyone needs a little bit of pandemic humor, but my German Shepherd does not have a good sense of humor. So every single time he sees this guy, he just starts barking like crazy. So we can't actually have him in the same room wherever we are. But anyway, so those of you who came early got a chance to see Bob. So, alhamdulillah, I just, let me start by first saying a really heartfelt thank you to everyone who donated during Ramadan for the Launch Good campaign. So as I mentioned before, we had, raised over $16,000, I think, when everything was said and done by the end of the month of May, which is incredible because the original target was something like 3,000 something. So, we're so grateful. And, inshallah, I mean, we have a lot, we'll talk more about other things coming up because I think if you've been following us and you know what we've been doing, we have a lot of really exciting projects. And I think that hopefully, we would really love if people could find it in their hearts to donate monthly and help us kind of continue a lot of these projects and help us kind of, share in that journey that, requires investment. And I think that one of the really exciting things that we're going to do, we talked about this in the Q&A when the professor revealed some of the new research that he's doing on the Quran. And we talked about the possibility of having a new Quran Halaqa, about the idea that every surah in the Quran has its own unique theme and unique message. And so the professor in 2 weeks from today is going to do the first Halaqa, or do one Halaqa, so we can see what he's talking about and understand the importance of the work. And then hopefully from there, once people see what it is, if they believe in it and they recognize the value of it, then I hope people will get behind it and support it so we can do more. Because obviously it's a huge commitment to have to be teaching full time and then doing this research on the side and trying to do halaqas and weekly khutbahs and all of that. So, we even though it's been pandemic mode, we've been really busy and alhamdulillah, doing a lot of really good things, but it would be really wonderful to focus our attention on leaving this legacy behind. I mean, I think one of the really important things about this whole pandemic time is it changes the way you think about life and death and what legacy you want to leave behind. And I think that whereas before, when I was shy to ask people to kind of, no one likes to be a fundraiser, no one likes to ask for money. But now I really believe that so much of what you leave behind is really all that matters. And that I truly believe in my heart that anyone who supports this financially, all of us share in the blessing of this legacy. And it's like an amazing idea that you could contribute to something that will continue to earn blessings for you long after you're gone, and that can help shape the future of Islam in America and help, our children find their way. So, I find that this is not an issue of shyness because it's not about me. It's not about the professor. It's about leaving behind knowledge that can really change things for the future of our world and for our kids. So, but more on that in the future. But do definitely mark your calendars. So 2 weeks from today, at the same time at 4 o'clock, we'll be doing our first new Quran Halaqa. So that should be really interesting. Also, we are going to schedule another Q&A session for July because the Q&As were really amazing and popular, and I hope that you'll share those. We haven't had the time to cut them up by question, but so instead what we did is we put timestamps on them so people can very easily read what questions we covered and find where we started talking about it in the 2-3 hour plus or actually I should say, so 6 hours plus of content, which nobody really wants to wade through. But I think that it was so valuable and so interesting, and people, found it. We got all kinds of, messages from people that they found it so valuable. So I really want to encourage you guys to share it, with anyone who you think would benefit. So, I can't believe that, honestly, it's been a month, just barely a month since we met for the last tafsir. And it's incredible because it feels like a long time ago, right? I mean, it's like the whole experience, I think, of time has changed. So the last time we got together, like we were a few days into Ramadan. So we had the whole month of Ramadan, we had all the activities. And it's like when I think back to where we were, it was like a different time in a different world, right? Because at that point, we were just dealing with the reality of the pandemic lockdown and the fact that everything was going online. And we were asking, okay, mosques are closing. What do we do about Taraweeh prayer? What do we do about virtual khutbahs? And we were really like, or I was especially really engaged in like, okay, how many people are dying from the pandemic and how many people, the numbers and all of that. And so fast forward to a month, and here we are in a completely different world, looking at protests. The professor was just telling me that the protests continue on. Of course, everyone now has seen, or has become aware of, the police brutality, George Floyd, and all of the countless other people who have been killed. And just, everything, right? So it's like we've forgotten about the pandemic. Now it's like the pandemic has entered a new phase of like, are we really going to open up our country? Are we going to go back to normal? I mean, nothing has honestly changed, but now we're dealing with, economic downturn, threats to democracy, the way people are dealing with the violence and police brutality on the streets. It's just, I think, shocking and, very, I'm sure, emotional for everyone, because I know for me, I have so many mixed emotions, and it's hard to also kind of follow just the overwhelming like avalanche of news that hits you every day. Everyone is talking about a different aspect of it. So for example, if you're listening to mainstream media, you're hearing a very sort of singular view that, it's about looting and it's about violence, but if you dig a little deeper, then of course, you listen to some of the independent news channels, you hear a lot more nuance and a lot more layering. People are talking about looting as a good thing, as, sort of a thing that is a response to the rich. But then you find that people are reporting most of the people that are looting are like white teenagers that have no interest in politics, and they're just taking advantage of the moment to break in a store and grab some free shoes. You're hearing about store owners, both rich and poor, that are getting brutalized. Black owners who are calling the police for help but getting brutalized in the process. And then it's heartbreaking to see just so many peaceful protesters, many of whom are so young and, that are confronting a very uncertain future. Like if they've graduated from college, they have no prospects for a job. And, they're standing there with their arms up yelling, don't shoot, don't shoot. Or they're, getting boxed in by police and saying, let us go home or let us leave. And I think these things are just so heartbreaking. And it's, so one of the things that I know that I struggle with, I mean, obviously, I'm not a person of color, I'm not a black person, I don't know what it's like to be a black person in America. And so, clearly, racism is at the forefront of everyone's conversations. And, here in the Muslim community, of course, we have our own issues with racism that we need to confront. So I guess in some ways, it's sort of good that a lot of this stuff is now coming to the surface, and the question is, how are we going to deal with some of those things? I know that, one of the things that I've been struggling with is just even the idea of my own privilege, right? So I haven't to this day really fully watched the George Floyd video. I couldn't handle seeing him killed. I saw stills of it, so I know what it looked like for that killer to have his knee on him. But, I feel guilty about that, because this is not my reality and I can choose to turn away. But there are so many people in the world that are suffering that can't turn away, because that's where they live. So, clearly, as a news junkie by nature, I've, had to, for survival purposes, stop being so much of a news junkie, right? So it's like I was literally, as I said, in the last Halaqa, I was watching so much stuff, about the pandemic. It was getting to be too much. But then now the pandemic, the presidential election, the economic collapse, the decisions that our government is making, it's like, okay, it's too much, but at the same time, as to be an engaged Muslim, we still have to stay connected. So, clearly, I think the answer is to become more discerning and to be, careful that you're not just, exploding all of your energy on stuff that is just not necessarily important. And I think that, so I wanted to share at least some of the sources that I have found really valuable, because I think that, when you're like, the vast majority of people are watching like MSNBC, and that's the station that toes the Democratic line, or on the other side, you're listening to Fox News, there's the Republican line. And the vast majority of what people are hearing is very, partisan. So I thought that I would share a show that I have found extremely valuable. It's called Rising on Hill TV, which is on a YouTube channel. And what's interesting about that, because I'm sort of, I'm in search of truth tellers, right? So, I feel like we're sort of in the business of truth telling and saying things that most people don't like to hear, and that, would be very controversial, but that I think in our time is especially necessary. So, for example, following politics, this show Rising has two commentators. One is Crystal Ball; she's a Democrat, and the man is a Republican. His name is Sagar Enjeti, and both of them come from the world of media. So, and also from Washington. So they know, very deeply what goes on behind the scenes in Washington and how it works, and how news is spread and how people get talking points every day and say, okay, here's what you have to say, and you hear those talking points repeated on all, the various channels. And they are able to actually, present sort of a balanced view from a truth-telling perspective. I mean, they're both populists, and they both have their own, perspectives, Democrat, Republican, but they're more interested in truth-telling. And they bring a lot of really smart people on the show to kind of help you get, beyond sort of the talking points. So they were actually, interestingly, on another person's show this past week. I don't know if people know Joe Rogan. He's got the #1 podcast in America, and it's very interesting. So Joe Rogan is kind of this Hollywood figure. He was on the show Fear Factor, and he's kind of he kind of speaks for everyday America, right? And it's sort of refreshingly honest, and surprisingly, he's kind of a MMA guy, mixed martial arts. So he's this big dude, and he's bald, and he swears a lot, But the thing about him is he's created this space for truth telling, where people are just very honest, and he has grown his audience, tremendously. And it was a big deal when he, endorsed Bernie Sanders. People were up in arms. It's this guy is looks like, a meathead or something, But he's a really smart guy. And he actually had both Crystal Ball and Sagar Enjeti on his show this past week. And it's a 3-hour-long conversation, but it was fascinating because they really dug down into the layers that people don't normally hear about our political system. They were talking about, different issues related to the protests and all of that. So I just really encourage people to kind of look for alternate means of getting their news. And, and I think it's a surprising thing when you find truth tellers across a lot of different spectrums. So here in this one show, you had kind of middle America and Democrat and Republican, but they came together on humanist, populist, reality-based issues. So it's really worth listening to. And then other sources of information that I trust are The Intercept, which is some of their rock stars are Glenn Greenewalt and Mehdi Hassan, who's a Muslim actually, and was on Al Jazeera, but he's an incredible journalist. Ryan Grimm, Naomi Klein, they're just anyone associated with The Intercept is amazing. They're really dedicated to digging out the truth. And then also Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman has always been incredible. And then I also like a podcast by the documentary filmmaker Michael Moore. And, he's always been a truth teller through his documentaries, and recently came out with a new documentary called The Planet of the Human, which was very interesting. It came out in celebration of the 50th anniversary of Earth Day. And it's a documentary about environmental activism and the failures of environmental activism and the whole climate change issue. And what was striking about it is because of the pandemic, they released it for free on YouTube so that, it turned out that like 8.3 million people watched it. But it was so like upsetting to the corporate world that they were able to cobble together some kind of lawsuit where they were able to force YouTube to go black. So they banned it. And for 12 days, it was banned. And it just came back online now. So it had, they found some issue with copyright or whatever. But clearly, it's truth telling. They obviously hit a nerve, and it obviously became a very big issue for people to quash it. So you should definitely watch it just for that. So, it's just to emphasize, we live in a time where trust is so, it's just not here. And people, trust is a really important measure of our personal security, right? If you don't have something to trust, it undermines everything about your world. And so, from a sort of non-Muslim perspective, some of these sources are really important for just staying, abreast with what's happening in the real world. And, it's like there was so much conflicting information, so much bipartisanship, so much politicking, it really is difficult to know who to trust. So, during Ramadan, the month of Ramadan, it was such a nice break to kind of say, okay, I'm going to take this time to sort of literally turn inward to home, right? So a lot of people know that I shared chapters of The Search for Beauty, the book by the professor. And, it was an amazing experience. I just wanted to talk about it again because now that we've sort of come out of Ramadan and we, sort of feel like, the blessings and the sort of ethereal spiritual lift that you get during that month, you feel like palpably like it's gone, it's not Ramadan anymore. But some of what was really special during that month was waking up every day and going, okay, what is the chapter that I am going to engage? And as I mentioned, I would say Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and say Al-Fatiha and then randomly, open to something and ask God really to choose the right chapter. And so last time when we talked, I had just started a few days into that process. But when we finished the process and I went back and I looked at, out of a book of 85 chapters, which 30 chapters were chosen. And some people say, oh, it's just a random whatever. No, I believe that when you pray and you ask God to help you choose, a chapter for a reason, that God answers your prayers. And when I look at the chapters that were revealed, it's truly like a divine curriculum that, even though this book was written over 2 decades ago, it's like every single chapter addressed something very important that we as Muslims should really think about and reflect on and understand and learn about. And so, the thing that was the most striking to me was the last chapter that was revealed, kind of at the end of the journey. It was like, okay, we've gone through all of these different chapters. We've seen all different sort of aspects of our world and what it's like to live as a Muslim. Where do we end this journey? And I was surprised that the chapter we ended on was called The Scholar's Road, and it was a tribute to scholars. And now this book was written really as, a testament to the fact that we as Muslims today are completely disconnected from our Islamic intellectual tradition. Like, we don't even know who the key players of, who are the scholars that, meant anything. Unless you are an Islamic studies student, you really have no occasion to even know who the big names in our tradition are. And so this book, argues that we've forgotten the tradition, we've forgotten knowledge, we've forgotten, the role of books. And this chapter, to me, underscored the point about the fact that part of losing that is losing the connection to our scholars and even our scholars today. Because, I was reflecting a lot about this, just the process of when you read a chapter that really touches your heart and touches your intellect and strikes something in your intuition, every time you read something like that, you are rebuilding your trust with God and rebuilding your trust in your faith. And so to do that for 30 days in a row was extremely empowering, and especially in this time of incredible destabilization and unrest, it was incredible to have that anchor that could pull you back and say, okay, I understand the world is going, crazy, but I can find my strength here. And I think when you think about the reverse of that, every time you hear something that is ugly or that doesn't sit well with your heart or is counter to your intuitive sense, you lose faith and you lose faith in God, right? Ultimately, that's the point. You lose faith in your religion, and it shakes everything about you. And so I was reflecting on this, and I think that we lose so much when, trust now is just that much more important. I think that people, honestly, Muslims, even though they quote unquote revere scholars or say that they revere scholars, or even the word scholar holds a certain supposed importance, I actually believe that people have completely lost trust in our modern day scholars. And it comes out in a lot of different ways that I've noticed. So, sorry, my dogs see, they believe this point. They're like emphasizing, yes, exactly. So, when I'm on Facebook and I get frustrated with the comments that people make, like, this happens a lot with the professor, even where it's like, what school of thought does he follow? And what gives him his credentials? And what I think about that? Okay, if I answer, well, you know what, he's a Shafi'i, he's a Maliki, he's a Hanbali. If I answer your question, does that actually make you understand anything? Does that actually give him any, higher level of status? I think the question is an expression of frustration, because I think that people have heard so much garbage from their scholars that they just don't trust them anymore, but they can't come out and say that. So it comes out in sort of passive aggressive ways. And, even like when I'm trying to share, like someone, you see all over the internet, people have questions about all kinds of things. And when I try to introduce like a link or an article or, something that the professor addressed, we all here know that, the answers that we hear here are very satisfying and very unique and very different from what you hear in mainstream, Muslim, in the mainstream Muslim world. And so when you introduce those things to try and help people and you get a very negative and, hostile response, to me, I read that as that's the trust that has been lost with scholars, to the point that, even if you don't say I don't trust scholars anymore, you really just ultimately don't. And I don't blame them, because, in our time, there are so many scholars that are silent in the face of injustice, or they say things that are ugly, or they say things that don't sit with your heart or, sit with your intuition. And what are you supposed to do with those emotions? So, what does it mean when we've lost our connection to our scholars, especially when God tells us that scholars, inherit the earth after the prophets are gone, right? So that leaves us in a really, really bad place. So, what is the point of me raising this? I think that, coming back to, first of all, the 30th chapter that I shared, called The Scholar's Road, I can't do it justice. I can't tell you how incredible it is. All I can say is please read it, because it introduces us to a lot of scholars, but it introduces us to sort of these rock star scholars in our history. And the one scholar in particular that the chapter focuses on is Ibn Aqil. And you kind of track through what happened to him in his life, and you're amazed by how much suffering someone will go through to uphold the trust of the word with God. And that's just something that you just don't see in this day and age. And so it was an eye-opener for me, because on paper, it's like, this is what a scholar should be. This is what a scholar goes through as part of their seasoning and their training, and what leads to wisdom and tests their commitment. And this is what we have forgotten and what we should expect of our scholars. What happens is, when you don't trust your scholars, the other thing that I've noticed on Facebook is a lot of sort of people that step in as scholars, right? So now there are a lot of Facebook pages that have been created, or communities where someone who is non-threatening, someone who's your friend, someone who's a graduate student, is moderating that page, and effectively now takes the space of the scholar. Because now, if you don't trust a scholar, you can trust your friend. But what happens then to the quality of the scholarship? You can start and you can say, okay, I created this Facebook page for people to come, and it's, it's a non-judgment space. It's a safe space to ask questions that, you might have or don't feel like you can't ask anywhere else. But what happens is when you open the door to those questions, you start getting really important, serious questions, and questions that have been dropped elsewhere, right, by other scholars. So you've effectively now put your friend in the position of the scholar, and that's unfair to your friend, you know? And so, but it lowers the level of everything. So, and then what happens then to the scholars that maybe are worthy of your trust, right? That maybe aren't the rock star scholars that you see on Facebook every day or find on Instagram, but they're the ones that are busy doing the real work of scholarship, and they're maybe publishing books or doing something like that. And obviously for me, you know, I have followed the professor in my, you know, for the last, virtually my entire time as a convert. I've read virtually everything he's written since we've met. And, you know, so I know the quality of what's here. And so I get frustrated when I see, you know, so many people that have lost trust and are not, and understandably, are not open to now reading, you know, and doing the hard work of learning from a true scholar. So I think it's something that, you know, we really need to reflect upon. And, you know, so just, you know, a couple of telltale signs that I'll share with you, which I thought were interesting to me that happened over Ramadan. So here you'll notice, I just wanted to point out, you know, here during the khutbahs, if you follow our khutbahs, I've noticed that several people have made the comment, when you watch this incredible khutbah by Professor Abul Fadl, I would recommend that you watch it in 1.5 speed, you know, because he very deliberately speaks slowly. And I think sometimes that's taken as, you know, I mean, there are people that will say, well, okay, we know the professor was really ill. And if you compare, like maybe some of the halaqas he gave 20 years ago, he spoke much faster than, you know, in the khutbahs, he's, you know, very deliberate with the words he chooses. It's not from illness. It's from the weight of the word and upholding the trust. And what I put forth as evidence of that is if you even just watch, like last week, the professor gave a lecture online through it was the SIGA, Center for Islam and Global Affairs, through Istanbul. He gave a talk on U.S. and the challenge of democracy in the Muslim world. It's a completely different tempo, completely different vibe, completely different thing. He's talking about his scholarship. He's talking about what's happening in the Middle East, you know, and it was like a very different engagement because he was speaking for himself. You know, he was speaking, sharing his ideas about his scholarship. He was not speaking and trying to convey the weight of God's word and what the Quran is trying to teach us as Muslims. So, you know, when he takes his time to choose the words, it's because he knows that he is going to be held accountable if he doesn't handle or present this in a way that's worthy of what he's teaching you. Now, you know, I compare that to what I found, you know, with other scholars, I wouldn't want to say scholars, other people in the mosque that give khutbahs, right? I mean, back when we were open, or even now if you watch khutbahs that are delivered online, there is not that same level of care because there is not that same level of awareness because the people that are speaking are not scholars. So, you know, these are all things that we need to think about. Another telltale sign, so humility. I was on Facebook and I was shocked to find that someone who's known as a famous imam somewhere in the UK was posting pictures of his new BMW that he had just bought. And he was making the point about how, because he travels to so many places, he really needs a reliable car. And he showed a picture of the car he had before, which was beautiful. And he had it for 7 years. But he made the point of saying, you know, the Prophet in his time had so many wonderful camels. They were like incredible, high quality camels. And this was a justification for him buying a BMW and posting it online. And, you know, and everyone was like, oh, mashallah, brother, congratulations, blah, blah, blah. And I was like shocked and ashamed. And I thought, really? Are we really posting pictures of our BMW, you know, in a time of a pandemic, an economic downturn, and all of this? And you were using the Prophet and his camels as justification? I mean, come on, really? And, you know, if the Prophet were to buy a car, like, I mean, you know, astaghfirullah, if he lived in our day, I would imagine him buying, like, you know, an electric powered car, maybe like a Prius or a Honda, something small. And I'm sure he would not post on Facebook about it. You know, and so it's just like that point of humility. I don't know. I just, you know, it was just something that was so jarring to me. And then the issue of sort of honesty, right? Truth telling and beauty and, depth of knowledge. It's like when I listen to a scholar, and I trust the scholar. Why is that? Is it, it's because that person is saying something to me that is relevant to my life and that helps me navigate, the world and help me figure out how to be a good Muslim, a better person. And, to me, like, when I see so many people, express their frustration or pose questions, like, oh, I heard that if you have, I can't even think, I think I literally block them out of my mind because I see them on Facebook, all kinds of ridiculous questions, because they've heard that from other scholars, and they're looking for someone to just come out and say, no, this is stupid and it's wrong and it's ugly. And people don't do that. They feel they can't do that unless they have a scholar that they can say, they can refer to from, whatever school and sheikh such and such, whatever. So, to bring it back, like when we live in times like this, I want to call out yesterday's khutbah as an example of, the power of a real scholar. And again, this is not, I used to be also really shy to say anything good about my husband. I'm sorry that I'm sure I'm embarrassing him. But it's like, it doesn't really matter what I think. What matters is the quality of the scholarship. And people here are here because they believe in what they hear and they know, they understand what we do here. But it's like, before yesterday's khutbah, I was swimming in confusion, swimming in angst and like, unhappiness and sadness and just not really sure what to make of everything going on in the world. And I felt like yesterday's khutbah helped me just realign everything. It's like it put everything in perspective. Like the khutbah cover, the professor talked about, the rise of Islamophobia, the rise of, white privilege, the rise, racism, the roots of racism. This is something that happened, before 9/11 and with 9/11, it took off. And, you understand sort of the larger context of why we live in the world we live in today and why being white has, the power that it has. And why we live now in a time where, you no longer have to be apologetic about being white, which wasn't the case before. And he talked about the militarization of the police and what that means for the threats to our democracy. And, and then he talked about, well, as Muslims, should we protest? Because, you're hearing a lot of people out there saying, oh, it's haram to protest. No, you shouldn't protest. Should we protest peacefully? Should we protest, should we do it forcefully? And so to be able to hear literally in one khutbah, everything that would make you realign and understand so much. Only a true scholar can really do that. And there are so few out there. So all of this to my point being that, I'm really proud of what we do, and I recognize that it's very rare. And, we can read about scholars in previous times, but we need scholars for the here and now with the issues that we're dealing with the struggles that we're dealing with. And, and I get a little bit frustrated when people try to, the Facebook groups that, should be just discussion groups and not like, friends teaching other friends. When we have a scholar in our midst that has a track record, that, gives us so much in terms of liberation, I believe that we need to embrace that and we need to support it. We need to get behind it. We need to amplify it. It's our job as Muslims to reach out to other Muslims who have lost trust in scholars and lost trust in God and lost trust in our faith to say, hey, you got to check this out because it's not lost. And I think that it's part of our duty to highlight these efforts and elevate them. And so, I'm really, just to close, I'm so happy that it feels like we're growing a very beautiful global community. We started out, very small, and I feel like people are starting to hear, more about what we're doing. And I think the pandemic certainly helped that because, people are online and they're searching, and so more people have come across our work. But sorry, to my point earlier, I get frustrated when it's like people, I think people have even forgotten, like, how to deal with like finding a scholar they like. It's almost like, okay, you find a scholar you like, but because you've been burned so many times,
maybe you should find a few other scholars just in case. But as a layperson, honestly, as a convert coming into this religion, not knowing anything, I was really fortunate to sort of find the professor, find his work. It struck my heart, my intellect, my intuition, and I was like, this is it. This is for me. I didn't have the issue of trust with scholars because it was new to me. So it's like, okay, I believe in this scholar. I trust this scholar. I don't really want to be scholar hopping, and this is for me. I'm not saying this for everyone else, but it worked for me because it was a source. I didn't know enough. I couldn't navigate between different scholars. I couldn't contrast and compare. What I did know is I trusted this particular scholar. I liked the way the scholarship read and sounded, and I wanted more. And so I started there. And now when I talk to people, new converts, I say, listen, you need a foundation because you don't have the tools to be able to distinguish or discern between what's sort of good knowledge and bad knowledge. So if you find someone you trust, read everything that they've written. Arm yourself with that. It doesn't mean you have to follow them like you're a cult, part of a cult. It means that you're creating a foundation in trust. And then from there, you have something to build on. You have something to, weigh other scholars with. And it's a smart, logical strategy. So, I hope, and I have found that a lot of our, global community members have done that. And I'm happy to say that, I see we have an Usuli Institute community on Facebook. And, for the most part, everyone is very polite and kind and, and they're engaged. And, that's really lovely because I don't see that in a lot of other Facebook pages. But I feel like people are still not trusting enough to say, okay, you know what? I want to commit to just reading everything that this professor has written or listening to everything. And I want to just encourage people. I think that it's a source of strength. I mean, I have, like I said, I've read everything. I've posted everything on the website. I know what this content is and I know the quality of it. And, I want to see our community grow. I want to see our community strengthen. I mean, I want not just in numbers, but I want the individuals in our community to know the professor's thought. I want them to master this thought and not be afraid to say, you know what, I like and trust this particular scholar, and until I feel comfortable that I've mastered this one, I'm not moving on to anyone else because I trust him. If you read it and you don't trust it, fine, of course, you don't have to stay. But so that's my advice, I guess, for this time. And, we know, I mean, I've said this many times before, it's like the only constants in this life are change and God, right? And we know that change is going haywire right now. So when all you have that is the other constant is God, it just underscores that much more, how important it is to strengthen that anchor you have with God and, and build that trust by reading things that elevate your trust, things that are loving and beautiful and reasonable. Because to do the opposite, you're going to just lose trust and move further away from God. So, so those are just some of the thoughts that I wanted to share for whatever it's worth, because I feel like everybody is, everyone is kind of navigating this, unsettled future. And, if you have a good anchor in God, then it makes life so much easier. And, it helps you find the peace that you need. And just to end, I guess, on some good news, it's sort of like a part of our global community. So everyone, I think by now knows that we had a nice conversation with Rami Youssef, the comedian. And I wanted to just say he just dropped his second season, and we watched all of it, and it was great. It was amazing, and people actually watched it and wrote in saying, it was really nice to see the professor's impact on some of the episodes, because, one of the writers, Adil of the show, would come to our Halaqa a lot, and, and Rami came to our Halaqa also. And it was really lovely to see in one of the episodes a dog featured prominently as someone who the sheikh gave to Rami to help teach him to be a better human being. And so I think that was definitely had a little bit of our signature on it. And then, they showed a prayer space with, men and women praying side by side, which we do at the Halaqas, and some other things that were more, intellectual. But So I hope, I mean, maybe I'm imagining it, but I hope that we had some positive influence in that. And I really encourage people to watch it because, you know, even if there are a lot of really difficult topics that are taboo, I think that there's so much beauty in addressing those topics head on and learning to, you know, talk about how do we deal with these issues because they're real issues. And, you know, Islam, you know, is about engaging the ideas and critical thinking. And that's what we're here about. So that's it. So thank you so much, and excited to turn it over.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم اللهم اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي امري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقهوا قولي بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. So, inshallah, we'll be returning to Surah Al-Fajr. But I just wanted if anyone is wondering the difference between these series or this series of tafsir and the experimental tafsir that inshallah we'll do in 2 weeks, they're very different things. This tafsir series is the more traditional, classical style of tafsir where you take each surah, you take all the reports about that have to do with Asbab al-Nuzul, the occasion for revelation. You take commentaries on each ayah and everything that's been said about each ayah from a linguistic perspective, from a historical perspective, from a theological perspective, and so on and so forth. And this is the way the traditional tafsir has always been done. It's ayah per ayah per ayah, and a surah is seen as a cluster of ayahs, which have a number of themes. Each surah has a number of themes and a range of themes within it that it covers one after the other until you get to the end of the surah. Now, there has been a question that I've wrestled with for a very long time, even at a time when I was in no position to answer any of these questions, meaning when I was very young. I don't really remember when I started wondering about this, but the question was and is, what is the function of each surah? If surahs are clusters of ayahs, are different surahs in the Quran redundant? Do they basically convey the same message over and over and over again, but they will make the point that life is a test, and that if you don't do well in your test, you go to hellfire, and if you do well, you go to Jannah. Is that point made just repeatedly in a number of surahs in a largely redundant way? And that, for me, has been a troubling question. I mean, if you take something, if we take a surah out of the Quran and if we take, let's say, Surah Al-Ankabut, or we take Surah Al-Nahl, does the coherence of the Quran lose anything if we simply delete a surah? So that's how the inquiry began, and I wanted to understand why each surah in the Quran, why each particular surah as a unity, not as a clusters of ayahs, but as a unity. Why is it there? The other thing is that when you study this material long enough, you realize that the earlier recipients of the Quran, the first Arabs who listened to the Quran, had an ability to interact and understand it in a way that is largely lost to us. The Quran spoke to them in a style and in themes and in images and in metaphors that was much closer to who they are as human beings, as epistemological human beings, as people ingrained within a certain set of experiences in their culture. And that part of the very early interactions with the Quran, what we notice that the commentaries on the Quran get longer as more centuries pass, as people's first experiences with the Quran get more remote, their commentaries get longer. The very first commentaries on the Quran were very short. Tafsir Muqatil, for instance, I mean, often it was just 1 volume or 2 volumes, and it was clear that they were relying on a certain memory, collective memory that they had of this text, that they would often reference in very succinct fashion. A part of that historical memory that was lost is the way that they named the different surahs. We all are told that, Surah Al-Ankabut is called Al-Ankabut because the word Ankabut is mentioned there. But that's not really a sufficient answer. When you look into it, you discover that, no, each surah could have had a very different name. That there were enough words, unique or atypical words referenced in the surah. So what I'm saying is that the early Muslims, when they named surahs, they're often named surahs because of a thematic relationship. They understood something about the purpose of the surah that eludes us. So anyway, all of this led to years of reading each surah and trying to imagine what role, what psychological, theological, philosophical, emotive role each surah played when it was revealed. Why do we have that chapter as a chapter? So I don't do a tafsir that deals with every ayah in every surah. Rather, I do a tafsir that tries to figure out the collective purpose of the surah. And of course, to do that for each surah, and to do it to do it justice, you're talking about, even if we exclude the shorter surahs, which have a different pedagogical role than the longer surahs. So you talk about at least 90 surahs, and if you do 2 hours on each of the 90 surahs, and you do one surah a week, you do the math. Then it would need a substantial period of time to actually just transmit that discourse, or transmit. So what we thought about is that doing a sample halaqa where I just demonstrate what I am talking about. It's very hard for people to, I think, understand unless you give them an example. So I'm not even sure at this point which surah I'm going to pick, because I don't want to start with Al-Baqarah, because Al-Baqarah would need more than a single halaqa to really discuss the role of Al-Baqarah. And I don't want to do Ali Imran, because the same applies to Ali Imran. And I don't want to do Nisa, because the same applies to Nisa. So then you have to take a shorter surah, and you have to take a shorter surah, and you have to show the thematic role that shorter surah plays, why that surah was revealed, and what role that particular surah plays in the collective message of the Quran, and hopefully by the time you get done with the entire thing, people would understand why each surah plays a unique role, and that investing in studying the collective message of the Quran is extremely worthwhile. That in fact, this incremental, segmented way of studying the Quran as ayah by ayah by ayah denies us a lot. I mean, we miss a great deal when we do that. So anyway, that's the purpose, and we'll see. I mean, I'm not sure where we'll go from there. I don't want to cancel these series of halaqas just because they preserve an important knowledge, and that's the classical tradition on tafsir. And adding a new series of tafsir, it would be just a lot, unless there's some relief from teaching, so that I wouldn't have to teach maybe for a year or something, so that I can okay, is that clear? Is that clear? So where we left off الفجر وليال العشر والشفع والوتر, did we get to والليل إذا يسر?
The first three verses. Did you say no?
My notes have والشفع والوتر as the last thing we talked about.
Did you get that? Washafa and Witr was the last thing we talked about.
Oh, okay, so we didn't get to ladies. Okay, so you recall then that we went through all the interesting discussions about what Shaf al-Watr refer to, and in my humble opinion, al-Watr is a reference to Allah as the singular, the one and only, and that's one of the views, but that's the opinion that I adhere to. And Shaf is anything that has an equal, anything that can exist in a duality. And the only thing that cannot exist in a duality is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the one and only, the singular. So, and then you remember that the surah starts like all the earliest revelations, and everyone will remember that nearly all the authorities said that Surah Al-Fajr is a Meccan surah. It was among the early surahs in Mecca, except for, I believe it was Ali ibn Abi Talha who said no, it was revealed in Medina. But when we have a singular report like that, so we can comfortably say that Surah Al-Fajr is among the earlier revelations, and anyway, stylistically, it follows the pattern of the very early revelations of the Quran, where Allah is building the iman of the structure of iman in a human being. That Muslim person, that human being who is going to bring Allah's message to the world, and in fact is going to become responsible for establishing an entire new civilization and bringing back the purity of the message of Ibrahim alayhi salam. Because remember that in Islam there's an early monotheism, and it's the monotheism of all the prophets from Adam onwards, and that Judaism has tribalized the monotheism. So Judaism became a theology for Israelites, a race, and a tribal lineage, if you will. The co-optation of monotheism to an ethnic reality, and the grafting of monotheism to an ethnic reality, while Christianity had diluted monotheism itself. Christianity, the very idea of al-watr and al-shafa, well, in Christianity, at a minimum, there is a duality in the Father and the Son. Whether that duality, as a lot of early Christianity was in fact not a trinity but a duality. Anyway, so the corruption of the purity of the monotheistic ideas, and that the early revelations of the Quran bring back that pristine monotheism, a monotheism that is not intended for a tribe, it's not intended for an ethnic group, and it's not intended for a linguistic group, and it is intended universally, and the insistence that this is the same monotheism that God has always given to human beings, and that human beings have always drifted away from. Because human beings always drift back to nationalism, to classism, to ethnocentrism, to some type of identity group and identity politics other than the oneness of Allah. The nature of human beings, and as we will see, like all the early Meccan surahs, Allah is reminding us of the follies of the folly of thinking that you can exist agnostically, that whenever you say, well, I don't have an identity, you're lying. And we'll see that in fact you the void will be filled. If there is a void, it will be filled. And it could be filled by God or it could be filled by shaitan. But it will be filled. No void remains empty. The nature of Allah's namus, Allah's laws in existence, is that you will fill it with something. Whether it's, the way you identify yourself with a group of friends, or with a cause, or with possessions, or with aspirations, the void will always be filled. The difference is whether in self-reflection you can understand that the only beautiful thing, the only appropriate thing, the only straight path things is to build your identity around the reality of your return to your Maker. But as the early surahs remind us, and the later surahs remind us in a different way, but still remind us of the same thing, is that in fact most human beings will fail, and do fail, in understanding that their only real identity is where they came from and to who they will return. Here, it's really important to remember that the early Meccans, like the Arabs of Arabia in general, they did believe in, not all of them, but various tribes believed in a God. But they believed that this God was inaccessible, and that this God, in order to be accessed, needed mediators. And that's where the idea of idols come from. Okay, that we'll revisit in other surahs, not in Surah Al-Fajr. However, this God, very much influenced by a lot of Greek and Romanistic cultures, and also by early Judaic cultures, this God existed to respond to the here and now, but once you died, you perished. Christianity had the idea of resurrection. Some forms of later Judaism had the idea of resurrection, not universally, but Greco-Roman cultures and early Judaic cultures believed there is no resurrection. By the way, some forms of some early Judaic theologies believed that resurrection would be only for Israelites, and that all the other races would perish. Only Israelites would be resurrected. And this is a critical point, that when Islam called upon the early Muslims, it ignited in them what they considered culturally to be the old mythology, the extinct mythology of resurrection. The Arabs, or the early recipients in Arabia, would hear about resurrection from Christians, would hear about the old mythology that believed in resurrection, but by the time Muhammad is there, والسلام, the cool thing, if you were cool, if you were hip and happening, if you were carrot, if you were with it, you no longer believed in resurrection. Now, of course, there is a very practical reason, is that the influential, the elite, the aristocracy of Arabia did not want resurrection, because resurrection meant accountability. And remember, so for instance, when Allah says, وَيْلٌ لِلْمُطَفِّفِينَ الَّذِينَ إِذَا اكْتَالُوا عَلَى النَّاسِ يَسْتَوْفُونَ وَإِذَا كَالُوهُمْ أَوْ وَزَنُوهُمْ يَخْسِرُونَ أَلَا يَظُنُّ أُولَئِكَ أَنَّهُمْ مَبْعُوثُونَ لِيَوْمٍ عَظِيمٍ يَوْمَ يَقُومُ النَّاسُ لِرَبِّ الْعَالَمِينَ. When Allah is reminding merchants and the aristocracy, do you really think you're not going to be held responsible for what you do on this earth? Do you really think that when you cheat, when you lie, when you إذا الموءودة سئلت بأي ذنب قتلت, when you kill someone, do you really think that it is as you want it to be? What is it that you want it to be? And we, that's the point that I will demonstrate, inshallah, in so many of the Quranic discourse, that the Meccans had latched onto Greco-Roman culture and early Israelite culture, that there is no resurrection, there is no accountability, there is no justice, you die and you perish. And for them, that was a very important point, because if it was otherwise, it would cause a revolution in. They understood what akhlaq was. They understood what shiyam was, what good manners and ethics were. But ethics remained optional as long as they were a matter of reputation. So, you could do the ethical thing either because you want to have a good reputation, or you can do the ethical thing because you fear God and you know there is going to be accountability. What is the problem with doing the ethical thing largely for sociological reasons is that if you can get away with it, where it doesn't affect your reputation, you do it. So you betray what is ethical as long as you can get away with it. And that's precisely the type of morality that the Meccans had. Yes, not cheating in trade was an honorable thing. They knew that. However, they knew that if you were from certain tribes, you can afford to cheat, and no one will dare impugn your honor because you're from a very influential tribe. So certain tribes would feel free to dictate their terms, even if it meant breaking their promises and committing fraud, because no one dared to hold them accountable. So that dynamic with morality and ethics is something that was very much present in Meccan culture, and something that the Quran comes and confronts head on and points the finger at the early recipients of the Quran, and by saying, no, understand that everything that transpires in your world is in fact nothing but a means to an end. The end is the hereafter. This life is not the real life. This is just your transportation to the real life. This is just a test. And there will be no escaping the consequences. And this point, you will notice, is hammered by the early Quranic revelations time and time. Nearly there is no surah among the earliest Meccan surahs that doesn't bring back, harp on that point of accountability again and again, because it is transforming the moral code of the audience of the Quran by telling them, you remember this mythology that you thought is nothing but a mythology, that it's all dead, and the idea of accountability and justice and resurrection. Well, guess what? It turns out to be absolutely true. And it is your belief that you just perish and that's the end of it is in fact what's untrue. Now, Surah Al-Fajr, like a lot of the early surahs, the way it wants your relationship with Allah, your attachments, your identification with the divine, to move from associating the divine with a clerical class, those who serve the idols, and a class of idols and the infrastructure that serves ash-shufa'a, the interceders, to a relationship with Allah directly connected to the natural order. And again, step back and think about this. You could associate, like a lot of the Meccans, when they thought about God, they would think about the Kaaba, but they would also think about God in terms of the idols of the Kaaba, the huge class of clergy that would receive the expatriation payments, the money that various Meccans would pay to this idol or that idol to bless their trade or to bless their family or to whatever. The class that would do the Aslam were a form of what is the word? There's a word for it. But basically, where they would have arrows in a container, and then you pay money and you ask question, and then you pay the priest money, and the priest would pull out an arrow, and the arrow would either tell you do or don't do. So soothsaying, but there's another word that I'm blanking out on. Yeah, like fortune telling. What did you write?
Divination?
Oh, divination. Hang on, I'm going to write it.
Yes, that's it. Divination. Yeah, divination. So remember that there is a cultural infrastructure, but the cultural infrastructure of how you identify with God is very important. I mean, if in our modern life, for instance, a lot of people, the minute they think of God, they think of the Muslim community that they grew up with, that connected them to God. And that is why when they are disappointed in this Muslim community, they might lose their faith, or they might feel lost, or they might feel like, oh, well, Muslims are hypocrites, so I don't know how I feel about God. The reason for that is that you've actually never believed. You never actually developed a relationship with the divine in the first place. You had a cultural definition of the divine. And so it is something that not a lot of people point to or observe, but it is very important that the Quran repeatedly refers to nature, to creation, and as if telling these Muslims, you want to understand God, look to the order of nature, look to God's creation, not to social institutions or cultural institutions or whatever infrastructure that had defined and shaped your relationship with God. So that is why the early Quranic revelations will often have Allah swearing by the movements of the night and day, the movement of planets, the movements of the sun and moon, the seas, the mountains, the earth, and so on and so forth. And as if saying, reintroduce yourself to your Maker through the handwork of the Maker. To the fact that there is a carefully measured order to creation, and when we know that the Quran refers, repeatedly to the intricate balance of creation. Without the intricate balance, you would not exist, and things would not exist, and that intricate balance is consistently sustained. But that intricate balance would also tell you that in the same way that in an instant all reality will perish, there will be a new reality, and that's the reality of accountability. So Allah swears by the five things, by Al-Fajr, Al-Layal Al-Ashr, the 10 blessed days, and we talked about that, by Al-Shaf, the duality, and Al-Witr, the singularity, and the power of singularity, and وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَسْرِ, which التقابل مع الفجر. So the Fajr and وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَسْرِ, these are the two parallels, the dawn and the night. Okay. وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَسْرِ, there's a couple of points just to make about what the language, وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَسْرِ. There has been an interesting discussion about what does وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَسْرِ precisely mean. I forgot the study Quran. Can you, it's in my den. I'm just grabbing my translation. I will. So وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَسْرِ, and the literal translation وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَسْرِ. Let's see how they translated it. Okay, so the study Quran translates it as and the night as it recedes, which is, an acceptable, plausible translation. But the issue, there is a discussion in the tafsir. Is it referring to the night prayers, or is it referring to the night as it progresses? So the night passing before the rise of Fajr, so it's as if the night passing before Al-Fajr comes about, or is it in fact referring to that passes in the night? And here I'll just mention for those of you that know Arabic, some expressions. So, for instance, when we say يسري الليل بجمع فمضى, يسري الليل بجمع فمضى. What we're saying here is there are people that passed, that spent the night until the night went away. So Yasri could refer to the night itself passing or receding or progressing, or it could refer, like when you say, for instance, ليل نائم or ليل ساهر or ليل يسري. ليل نائم means not that the night is sleeping, but that there is someone sleeping in the night. If you say ليل ساهر, it doesn't mean that the night is staying up, but it means that there's someone who stayed up in the night. Similarly, when you say Layl Yasri, it could mean not that the night passes, but someone is passing in the night. So there's interesting grammatical debate. There's also there's a qira'at discussion. Why is it وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَسْرِ without إِيَاء or يَسْرِي with إِيَاء? And some reports said, well, if there is a waqf, if you pause after you say وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَسْرِ, then the ya goes away, and if there is a wasl, if you don't stop, then you should say yasri with the ya. All of this is not critical for us. What is important is to basically understand is that Allah is, when Allah takes an oath invoking natural things in nature, Allah is pointing your attention to the fact that it cannot be without a creator and an intricate balance. It's as if Allah, to be quite honest, when I read the early surahs, I often feel as if Allah was talking to much later generations who adopt the completely illogical belief that all of this can be the result of coincidence or evolution. I mean, it is much more relevant to us than I think than the generations of the Prophet, ﷺ. Because to them, the idea that, well, it has to have there has to be a creator. What was problematic for them is that, well, there might be creators in the plural, rather than a singular creator. For us, that what's problematic is that there is a creator at all. And then we adopt the completely illogical notion that very carefully sustained order of night and day and seasons and gravity and so on can somehow just materialize out of nothingness and come to be out of nothingness. The early generations of Muslims understood that when Allah takes an oath, that when Allah uses something and swears by it, that it becomes Allah is inviting us to reflect on it. But their reflections, perhaps they were not in a position to understand how remarkable that Allah swears by these things as we are. Anyway, I want to move on. Although at this point, we'll come back to it many times. because I've read enough of the so-called new atheists, the movement of the new atheists and the prophets of new atheism. I have to tell you, the prophets of new atheism, like what's his name? I'm blanking out on their names now. It has been a long time since I've read their stuff. What? Oh yeah, Hitchens. Yeah, Christopher Hitchens, and so and company. I mean, it is a new religion. New atheism is a religion, and it relies on elements of faith, very much like a religion. It reminds me a lot when I would read communists, and they just tell us about certain things, that certain movements and forces and interpretations of history that you just have to believe in, and ultimately there's nothing that proves it, but it just and new atheism works in the same way. You just have to believe that out of nothing came something, and out of that nothingness and this complete chaos came this intricate order, and you just have to believe that science will explain it someday. Yes, science can't explain it today. Yes, science has no clue how to explain the materialization of something out of nothing and the materialization of intricate order out of chaos, but just as an element of faith, you have to believe that the day will come where science will explain everything. That's what atheism is. And mocking religious beliefs, but not answering them. I mean, the writings of the new atheists is full of, funny quips and little smart-sounding statements. But ultimately, they're not responses. There's no philosophical response to anything, and no even scientific response to anything, because even evolutionary theory doesn't claim to explain creation. It simply explains the fact that beings adapt to where they are. However, the new atheists turn evolutionary theory and biological sciences into a religion that explains these ultimate questions of origin and truth, which no real biologist claims. I've never read a serious academic biologist, not one of these new atheism, who says, I'm here to tell you where we came from. Because it's a question that is not answerable in science. The new atheists basically say, just trust us. Someday science will answer these questions. And so when you read Qisar Surah, part 30 of the Quran especially, and part 29, Juz 29 and 30, 29 and 30, and you find that Allah constantly says, look at nature, look at nature. If you're smart, you would pay attention, and you would reflect, and you would take it seriously. Okay, so classic of the Meccan style, this early Meccan style, after the invocation of the Qasam, Allah switches gear and reminds the audience, the recipients of the early Quran, that it is not just nature that speaks to you, but history speaks to you. Nature and history. And from the Quranic perspective, what is the ultimate lesson we get from history? And we'll talk in a second about exactly what these ayahs are saying, but the ultimate lesson we get from history is that whatever will rise will fall. As the Quran says elsewhere, that when you are among the nations that are dominant on earth, trust that the time will come where you will fall. With a further element, that the rise and fall of nations is not happenstance, but that there is a God, and that God aids nations in their rise and punishes nations through their fall. And that history itself is worthy of reflection to understand our Maker and what our Maker wants from us. Now, in this context, as the Quran often did, especially talking to the Quraysh of Mecca, as if Allah is telling Quraysh, remember that there were other nations before you who thrived and who saw themselves as very powerful and mighty. But that ultimately, God decreed that they lose their power and their might and that they deteriorate. The early Arabs, in the same way that they knew mythologies about the mythology of resurrection, which they rejected, they had also heard mythologies about Ad, the tribes of Ad, the tribes of Qawm Salih, sorry. So I do it in an order fashion. Yeah. So, that's why I blanked for a second. I skipped هل في ذلك قسم لذي حجر, but let me finish the thought and come back to it. So, Allah will invoke the historical memory of Ad, وإرم ذات العماد, and of course the Fir'aun. But before we get there, I skipped over ayah 5. هل في ذلك قسم لذي حجر. The question, of course, is rhetorical. ذي حجر is a person with a strong intellect. A person with a hijr is not just aql, but is aql that is endowed with sharpness and wisdom. Now, why was it called hijr? If you notice, it shares the etymology with hajar, with rocks. It also shares the same etymology with hujra, a room, and it shares an etymology with hijr, means there is a legal procedure when you take hijr is what is the English word I'm looking for when you it's a legal action where you take someone's legal ability to make their own decisions, and you now have the power to act as their agent. Like, if your parent is going interdiction, no, it's another word. Not usurp, no. No, anyway, there's a word, it's a very specific word there, but I'm blanking out, I can't remember it. But anyway, when you basically, if you have a parent who's becoming senile and you're worried that they're going to waste all their money, so, that is called hijr in Arabic. And very interestingly, they all have the same relationship to the language. The reason intellect was referred to as hijr, if it is sharp and wise, is because what does a hujra do? What does a room do? What does the legal action of hijr do? It restrains your whims. What does a room do? A hujra do? It sets limits to your movements and protects you. So those who have aql rajih, who have a sound intellect, have a hijr, meaning they have something in their skull that is able to restrain them and to protect protect them from whims and protect them from ill decisions. That's why in classical Arabic, and it wasn't it was not the Quran wasn't the first to use it that way. It was known to Arabs. They're referring to a wise, sharp-witted person as a ذو حجر, a man with that ability. So هل في ذلك قسم لذي حجر is the rhetorical question. Can a person with a strong-witted, sharp mind understand why Allah swears by the natural order of things, the intricate balance between night and day? But where you get some of the most fascinating discussions is by the reference to the singularity and the duality. And of course, you get some very interesting, especially in Sufi writings, very interesting things about why Allah uses the words shaf' wal watr that have a literal meaning that could be as simple as referring to a prayer. 2 rak'ahs, 1 rak'ah, but at a much deeper level refers to the nature of reality. That if you truly use your intellect, and let's imagine someone who sits there and thinks and thinks and thinks and prays and prays and prays for hours and days and weeks and months, and their mind has developed to the point that it achieved unity with existence. Let's imagine, and I'm taking this, of course, I'm stealing it from earlier sources. I can't remember which book. Anyway, what they will realize is that the very nature of creation is based on the principle of coupling, what the az-zawjiyya, that in the same way there is night and day, energy is positive and negative. To everything there is an opposite thing. And that singularity, when it exists, it points to something that is not subject to the laws of duality. In other words, when singularity exists, it is no longer subject to the normal laws of physics, biology, and mathematics. So it is if, this is in the same idea of wajib al-wujud, that every created thing comes from a creator. That's the logic of duality. But when you reach a singularity, a true singularity, then that logic cannot be applied. We simply do not know, because it's not in our realm of experiences. I'll give you an example just of the flavor. Where is it? Yeah. So here, for instance, this is from Tafsir al-Jilani, which gives you a flavor of that, of what I'm talking about. First, I'm going to just read it in Arabic. So he says, والوتر أي الوجود الوحداني المطلق المنزه عن التعدد والتكثر مطلقا في ذاته. This is the idea of of singularity. الوجود الوحداني, singular existence, المطلق, absolute, المنزه عن التعدد والتكثر مطلقا في ذاته, that not subject to the laws that we know. Then he continues, so then he talks about qasam lidhi hijr, when swearing by the hijr, says فهو عقل لا يشوبه الوهم والخيال خال عن مزاحمة مطلق الإلف والعادات الحاصلة من الرسوم والتقليدات الناشئة من ظلمات الطبيعة. And then he goes on, okay, then it gets too difficult for, but anyway, so what he's saying is effectively that mind that has able to go beyond the superficial laws of nature to understand the balance between the remarkable oneness of an absoluteness of the singularity, which is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's ultimate singularity, and that everything else that is created compared to the one is false and superficial. Okay, and so and again, we are raised, we often find the Quran swearing by this or swearing by that, and we don't pause. We don't pause because they don't teach us to pause. But when you read the way early Muslims received this revelation, and it transformed their entire life, to them, the Quran intrigued them in ways where it called upon them to revisit the world and re-understand the world. And that's what the Quran should do to us, if we can develop that type of relationship. Okay, so that's the qasam. هل في ذلك قسم لذي حجر. Okay, so now the people that, or the tribes that the Quran invokes as part of reflecting on history. So the tribe of Ad, the tribe of Thamud, and the tribe of Pharaoh. The most interesting thing I can tell you is, from a historical perspective, very little can be known about Ad or Thamud or the people of the Pharaoh. Or the Egyptians, perhaps the ancient Egyptians are the ones that we know the most about. There were a lot of mythologies as to where Ad and Thamud were exactly. And I've talked about this in the context of another surah, when we talked about the Qawm Salih. Do we have any geographic locations or geographic remains for Ad and Thamud that survive to our modern age? And probably the short answer is no. We don't have any reliable. There, those who tell you, well, it's the Petra in Jordan. All of that is speculative and not reliable. So, the interesting points here So we know that Ad, قوم عاد, ألم تر كيف فعل ربك بعاد إرم ذات العماد التي لم يخلق مثلها في البلاد وثمود الذين ذابوا الصخر بالواد. So let's take it piece by piece. Ad is Ad bin Aus bin Iram bin Sam bin Nuh. So these are the descendants from the Prophet Nuh alayhi salam. Again, the full name as it's been reported, although there are different versions, Ad bin Aus bin Iram bin Sam bin Nuh. And these are known as Ad al-Ula, whose prophet was Hud. The prophet was Hud to Ad al-Ula. The former Ad, or the earlier Ad, there is a later Ad and there is a former Ad. And the Ad al-Ula, their prophet was Hud. There are reports that they resided in an area in Yemen. There are reports that they resided in what is today Jordan. There are even reports that they resided in Alexandria. There are even reports that they resided in Damascus. All probably the Alexandria reports are we can say probably reliably false, and Damascus reliably false, and probably Jordan reliably false. What we do know about them is that they resided in areas of Al-Ahqaf. Ahqaf is a desert area, which seems to indicate that they were not an urban center like Alexandria or Damascus. Anyway, some of the stuff that you read is that they resided in cities where they created flowing rivers of milk and homes built of gold. All of that are fabrications that when in early missionary movements, in the early days of colonialism, Orientalist missionaries loved to take these narratives and to use them to try to convince Muslims that their tradition is so ridiculous. Look, you believe in cities built of gold. And although Muslim scholars a long time ago have, centuries before colonialism, had said that these reports were unreliable and they're not even worth going into. So, Ad, their prophet, is Hud, and we know that they had reached a high level of power. They became very influential in the Near East area. In fact, they divided into a number of tribes and create a dynasty that was formed of a number of kingdoms. Our archaeological sciences are very backwards because whatever archaeology developed in the Muslim world developed purely as a result of the interests of Western nations. So whatever colonialism was interested in, so colonialism was interested in Petra in Jordan. Colonialism was interested in ancient Egyptian archaeology for a variety of reasons. And so that's what developed. Muslim archaeology is very, very backwards. And so, we have a lot of mythology but very little archaeology that can in fact support anything. So the reference to Ad is a reference to this inherited historical narrative that the Arabs were aware of, that Ad existed and that Ad ultimately was destroyed. Here you get when the Quran says Iram that al-Imad, what is the Quran precisely referring to when it refers to Iram? And that's where you get some of the considerable disagreements. I'll sum them up to say, some said that when Allah says Iram, Allah is referring to the grandfather that Ad descended through. So remember that Ad descended from Aus, who descended from Iram, who descended from Sam, who descended from Nuh. Right? You don't have to memorize the names anyway. But so the great grandfather of Ad is Iram. However, most scholars said, no, that doesn't make sense for a variety of linguistic arguments, that it is in fact not referring to the grandfather of Ad, but referring to a tribe within the clan of Ad. That Iram was just a tribe within the clan of Ad. And that specific tribe within the clan of Ad had become famous, and I'll comment on what al-Imad is, but had become famous for al-Imad. Question mark, what is al-Imad? We'll get to that in a second. Some said, no, it's not either a grandfather nor a tribe within the clan of Ad, but rather Iram refers to the area that Ad inhabited. Personally, I think, we don't need to resolve this debate. It is enough to know that, and this is the way I ultimately, what I conclude about these verses, is that Allah is referring to Qawm Ad, and that Iram is an identifying lineage of Qawm Ad. Whether it refers to specifically but whether it's like in the same way that Quraysh is has the tribe of Banu Hashim, and we know that the descent that Quraysh has a lineage that identifies them. Now, so it's a reference that, at least for the recipients of the Quran, they understood as a reference to Ad al-Ula, the influential tribe of Ad that had either become, and that's where the debate about Imad centers. Iram That al-Imad. What is al-Imad? Qawm Ad were famous among the Arabs, and we find even poetry where these Arab poets are imagining the glory of Qawm Ad for high pillared buildings, and not made of necessarily of palm trees, but high pillared buildings, and that it took a considerable amount of technological awareness to construct these pillars. There is a second narrative about Qawm Ad that's very interesting. A lot of authorities insist that Qawm Ad were among the race known as the giants. Have you ever heard the mythology about finding big bone skeletons? If you watch programs about ancient aliens and stuff like that, and cryptids and weird things like that, they tell you that and this is not a scientific myth, it's true, that they found the skeletons of human beings that were giants. They were considerably taller than modern human beings. Are you writing something? Oh, Sharif says it's true. I believe in the giants because I saw the bones. I mean, there's no explanation. They're just very big bones. So anyway, the Arabs, there were a lot of Arab narratives about Qawm Ad were being among the giants. And so is the Quran referring to Iram Dhat al-Imad? Is it referring to their stature or to their buildings? Honestly, I believe it's referring to their buildings, not to their stature. But I'm very intrigued by the idea that it's referring to their stature. But, you could take it or leave it. It doesn't matter. So, Iram Dhat al-Imad, because Imad could even refer to their moral stature, not moral meaning their prestige. When you say Rajul Dhu Imad, it means a prestigious person, someone who has a lot of power. So when you say فَعَلَ رَبُّكَ بِعَادٍ إِرَمَ ذَاتِ الْعِمَادِ, Allah could be simply saying that these people who were very powerful once upon a time, and of course, when the Quran says التي لم يخلق مثلها في البلاد, the like of which was not created. That's because I just remembered this. That's why a lot of Quranic commentators said, well, if it was just their buildings, then why would the Quran say the like of which was not created? That is an indication that it's referring to their actual physical length, or that they're giants. A lot of other commentators said, no, it's figurative. التي لم يخلق مثلها في البلاد doesn't necessarily mean that they are truly unique. It doesn't mean that they are singular. It doesn't mean that they are watr, to use the Quranic expression. It means that they are exceptional. So you can use the expression like the which. So if I say to a human being, لا أعرف مثيلا لك, I don't know the like of you. I don't know someone who is like you. That doesn't mean that I am truly saying you are an alien from outer space. It's just simply saying you are an exceptional human being. If I say it to the singular, if I say it to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so if I say لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ, now here it's referring to Allah. Here it becomes not a shaf' but it becomes a watr. Do you see what I'm saying? So here it becomes, you're referring to the singularity, the like of which there is none. So those who read the early reference in the Quran to Shaf' al-Watr as hinting to the Quranic usage التي لم يخلق مثلها في البلاد, saying, well, it's already giving us a hint that doesn't mean that there is singularity. There's no way that we were going to resolve the debate. Just be aware that, that there is something that was truly exceptional about Qawm Ad, and that they were truly powerful, and that they dominated the land in which they live. They created a level of hegemony, and they were feared and respected far more. Their power and influence, it far exceeded what Quraysh had ever achieved. Okay, Thamud, Qawm Salih, الذين جابوا الصخر بالواد. Some, especially contemporary Muslims, misunderstand this to believe that الذين جابوا الصخر بالواد, that they built their homes in the mountains. Notice the Quranic expression الذين جابوا الصخر بالواد. They brought, or they crafted, or they used the stones from al-wad, from the valley. We understand it to mean a mountainous valley, but what Qawm Thamud were known for was their ability to cut stones from mountains and to use these stones in their buildings. Now, elsewhere, the Quran refers to those who create out of the mountains buyutan farihin, luxurious homes. Again, it doesn't necessarily mean that they dig the homes into the mountain. It means that they use the rocks from the mountains to build elaborate structures. The reason I mention this, or even posit this, is that, again, some missionaries and contemporary evangelists, nowadays evangelists, who are obsessed with finding the Quran, they want to just find the Quran making some mistake or another. So they'll come and say, look, the Quran referred to Qawm Salih or Thamud as building homes in mountains. Well, these structures that exist in mountains found in Jordan or found in Yemen were tombs. They were not homes, which means the Quran doesn't know what it was talking about. You'll find this on the net. I'm not, this, oh, the Quran made it. And, when I read that, I thought, are you insane? The Quran doesn't tell you that they lived inside the mountains. The Quran tells you they made homes out of mountains. There's a huge difference. And by the way, even if in Arabic poetry, early Arabic poetry, the word bayt could be used for a home, and it could also be used for a crypt, or what is the word I'm looking for? A mausoleum. So you could actually, again, for all these young kids out there who read some missionary or evangelist and they, I'm very confused, I'm lost, and so on. Things are only seem so overwhelming because you don't know enough. But the word bayt, even if the Quran had used the word bayt to refer to something in mountains, rather than using mountains, mausoleums could be referred to as bayt. So it's wherever you reside, living or dead, is your bayt. That's in Old Arabic. Of course, it's not so in modern Arabic. Okay. I got a couple of emails, people would say, can you answer, tell us about the Quran, when the Quran mistakenly says, blah, blah, and I don't respond to this stuff, but it frustrates me when I find these undergraduates who are like, I'm so confused, I was taught the Quran never makes a mistake, and, how can it make such a silly mistake, and, anyway. Alright. وَثَمُودَ الَّذِينَ جَابُوا الصَّخْرَ بِالْوَادِ. So we talked about that. Now we come to Fir'aun. Now, وفرعون ذي الأوتاد الذين طغوا في البلاد فأكثروا فيها الفساد فصب عليهم ربك صوت عذاب إن ربك لبالمرصاد. Quranic commentators noticed that not just here but elsewhere, the Quran will often pause when it comes to the mention of Fir'aun and provide details or focus and concentrate on Fir'aun more than it would when it would refer to earlier tribes. Some said that this is because أثار فرعون باقية, that Allah knew that unlike Qawm Ad and Thamud, their historical remains are gone. That when it comes to the people of the people of the Pharaoh, the Pharaonic people, whether it was the Hyksos in Egypt or before the Hyksos or after the Hyksos, it doesn't matter. That in fact there will be historical remains and that you can actually visit and you can reflect upon. And the commentators who are of this school will often also refer to the body of Fir'aun. And these are, as that school of thought gained more and more adherents as in the modern age we suspect that we found the body of Fir'aun, although the Egyptian government has ordered the Egyptian Museum to deny that this is the body of Fir'aun. And I mean, very odd, very, very odd. I had a friend who used to work in the Egyptian Museum, and it was a she, and she told me that she was under orders to show the body, but anyone that asks her if this is the body of Fir'aun referred to in the Quran, to say no, regardless of the historical evidence. And she was telling me the various historical evidence about the body she was showing me. And in fact, she believed it was the body of Fir'aun, but that if she said so, she would be fired, if not arrested by Amn al-Dawla. Very odd, very strange. I know that the Zahi Hawass, the little gopher that the government has appointed as the head of Egyptian antiquities, will destroy the career of anyone who says yes, the body of Fir'aun survived. It's very odd. I mean, why would the Egyptian government make it a point to make it like an issue of national security, to deny that the body of Fir'aun might have survived? Anyway, whether the body of Fir'aun survived or not, I guess we will not know as long as this government is in power, because it will not allow any scientific examination of the body to either deny or confirm. But some have said that Fir'aun had become a symbol for ongoing tughyan. So if you read Tafsir al-Maturidi, for instance, Tafsir al-Maturidi goes into why precisely Fir'aun has become symbolic in the Quran for tughyan and zulm, for injustice and oppression. That the Quran goes through the trouble of telling us in considerable detail the dynamic between Moses and Fir'aun, of course elsewhere, and Joseph and Fir'aun of the time, or at least the Malik of the time, the ruler of Egypt of the time, is that what the Quran is referencing is the paradigm of oppression and injustice. And in fact, we know that the minute you say the Pharaoh in Islamic culture, it had become a symbol for oppression and injustice and despotism in its worst form. Okay, so why does it say وَفِرْعَوْنَ ذِي الْأَوْتَادِ? That's... How did you translate أوتاد? of the tent poles. Okay, it's very interesting that he chose tent poles. What is a watad? Autad is a plural for watad. And a watad is something that goes is pillared. Whatever is used as a pillar. So here when it says وَفِرْعَوْنَ ذِي الْأَوْتَادِ, is it referring, as a lot of Egyptian Quranic commentators said, is it referring to the pyramids? Because the pyramids are autad. They are things that are like mountains, pillaring the earth. Or is it referring to the fact that all pharaonic temples had these huge pillars that they stand, if you go to visit any of the pharaonic Karnak temples and so on, immediately you notice these huge pillars. Or is it referring to, some commentators said it's referring to pyramids, that these are the people of the pyramids. Some said no, it's referring to the fact that that Pharaoh would use an enormous amount of labor to build these temples with very high pillars and very huge pillars. And these pillars, by the way, in ancient societies were a sign of power and wealth. The more elaborate, the bigger your pillar, the greater the sign that you have dominated and control earth. Third school said no, it refers to the method of torture that Pharaoh would use against his opponents. And that's what Autad referred to. Pharaoh had become infamous. Pharaoh Musa had become infamous for the fact that he was fond of, when he would torture his opponents, he would tie them to 4 poles anchored on the ground and then start ripping them piece by piece. So they're sprawled out, and then torture them by cutting them up. So there's a story that is reported in hadith sources about Fir'aun Dhil Awtad. You won't find it in every tafsir, but you definitely the tafsir that rely on akhbar, you find it that Fir'aun had a minister, I think one of the finance minister. It was a minister of that minister had converted to the religion of Moses and was hiding his face. And that minister had a daughter. That daughter worked as a maiden to Pharaoh's daughter. So Pharaoh had a daughter, and that minister had a daughter, and Pharaoh's daughter employed the minister's daughter as one of her maiden girls. So one day she's combing the minister's daughter is combing the hair of Pharaoh's daughter, and she drops the comb. I can't hear myself, so I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but you comb your hair with. I can't hear it, so I don't know if I'm pronouncing it right, but it's okay? Okay. So she drops her comb, and when she blurts out something to the effect like "A'udhu billah," oh my, God forbid. So Pharaoh's daughter hears her when she blurts out that and says, "What did you say?" She says, whatever. She tries to back out of it. Pharaoh's daughter said, no, you have to tell me, you don't believe that my father is God? Because you just mentioned God. So the minister's daughter tells Pharaoh's daughter, okay, I'll level with you. I don't believe your father is God. Here's what I believe. I believe in La ilaha illallah, there's only one God, and Moses is a prophet of God, and so on. So Pharaoh's daughter goes and tells her father about the minister's daughter. So Pharaoh arrests the minister's daughter and tortures her using the autad method. And in the course of this severe and horrible torture, she confesses that her father is a convert. And so they go and arrest the father, who's the minister, and they torture him. And when they torture him, anyway, they torture him for a long time and then they kill him. So now they've killed the minister and they killed the daughter of the minister. Pharaoh's wife, one of his wives, had Asya, her name was Asya, had converted as well and was a follower of Moses. And when she sees the horrible death of the minister and his daughter, and although they're tortured to death, they refuse to tell Pharaoh that his own wife had converted. She becomes livid. And she says, these people were so brave, they were tortured to death, and they didn't confess my name, they didn't spill their guts about my conversion. She goes and confronts Pharaoh, and she says, you're disgusting, I hate you, how could you do this to these poor people? Pharaoh says, so you're a follower of Moses yourself, you will go back, you will repent, or I'm going to torture you to death. She refuses, and then she's tortured horribly and eventually killed, and using the autad method. And from these narratives of the horrible torture and killing of various people that they became known as in various narratives as Fir'aun dhil Autad. Now, so when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, الَّذِينَ طَغَوْا فِي الْبِلَادِ فَأَكْثَرُوا فِيهَا الْفَسَادِ, those who have committed oppression in God's land, فَأَكْثَرُوا فِيهَا الْفَسَادِ, and spread corruption in the land. Mufassirun like al-Maturidi will say this is irreverence to the nature of al-Tugha, the nature of the unjust and oppressive rulers, is that they torture and imprison people. Remember that among the earlier, and I've written the whole entire rebellion book to in part to discuss this, is the idea of torturing your political dissidents was seen as a corruption, as ifsad fil ard, and as a form of tughyan, of oppression. And some of the Fir'aun is horrible, not just for his kufr and his arrogance, but also for his despotism, and also for his oppression, and also for the fact that he tortured people. Now, the others who said, no, Fir'aun dhil Autad, Autad refers to the high pillars or to the pyramids or whatever, say that الَّذِينَ طَغَوْا فِي الْبِلَادِ فَأَكْثَرُوا فِيهَا الْفَسَادِ doesn't necessarily, those who committed oppression in the land and spread corruption in the land, doesn't necessarily refer to torture per se, but it refers to the fact that Fir'aun was arrogant, monopolized wealth, committed a great amount of injustice, created an aristocracy that oppressed those who were below it, And elsewhere, the Quran constantly talks about that among the sins of Fir'aun is that he created classes of people that oppressed other classes of people, that created stratas within society that would oppress other stratas within society. Let's take a short break. Okay, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So even when the Quran says وَتَنْحَتُونَ مِنَ الْجِبَالِ بِيُوتًا فَارِهِينَ, that as we said, that you sculpt homes from the mountains. It doesn't necessarily mean that you sculpt your homes inside the mountains. مِنَ الْجِبَالِ, that you sculpt homes from mountains. You carve out rocks from mountains that you build your homes, or it could even refer to biyutan here, could refer to mausoleums or places where you house the dead. Anyway, so the important point though, when we going back to وَالَّذِينَ طَغَوْا فِي الْبِلَادِ فَأَكْثَرُوا فِيهَا الْفَسَادِ, those who have caused oppression and spread corruption in the land, فَصَبَّ عَلَيْهِمْ رَبُّكَ صَوْتَ عَذَابٍ إِنَّ رَبَّكَ لَبِالْمِرْصَادِ. So Allah punished them. إِنَّ رَبَّكَ لَبِالْمِرْصَادِ, God is ever watchful and holds people to account. Now, note here, a number of commentators noted that in the same way that the surah starts out by reminding us of ash-shaf'a wal-watr, the duality and the singularity, the sin that we find in Qawm Ad and Thamud and Qawm Fir'aun, the earmark of these tribes is that they imagine their own power as independent and singular in the height of elitism. They are unlike no other. They approach the world in which they live with great deal of entitlement. But there is a further point to take note of here, and that is, we notice that every despot that effectively demands to be worshipped in God's stead treats himself as a singularity. So, for instance, if you see the way people talk in Egypt, talk about Sisi, the president of Egypt, or people in Syria talk about Bashar, they talk about him as if he's a singularity. And in fact, if you tell Egyptians overthrow Sisi or Sisi shouldn't rule, they say, well, who else can rule Egypt? Or who else can rule Syria? Or who else can... That's the nature of dictatorship, is for a human being to think that they have no equal, that they have an absolute claim to the truth. They're not subject to shura. They're not subject to the power of another. They're not subject to the they're not accountable to another. And that is not just the nature of despotism, but that's the nature of evil. So when I've said in the past that the reason that Islam was revealed to these Arabs is because they were free-spirited, they were human beings that could create a civilization because they were free-spirited human beings. They rejected the idea of subordination to another. And so we find these remarkable parallels in Surah Al-Fajr, that even if you didn't know the specific meanings of the words, just reciting Surah Al-Fajr, you felt these meanings in your heart. You felt that it is telling you in your heart that you either approach this world with an awareness that only Allah is singular and unique and has no parallel and has no equal, but any human being in any civilization that imagines that as a ruler, as a tribe, as a race, as an ethnicity, that they are unique and superior, they become part of the corruption. And that their ultimate fate is to answer to God. Inna rabbaka labil mirsad. God is ever watchful, and God has set laws that dictate that people suffer the consequences of oppression and corruption sooner or later. So there's the literalist said, well, with the Qawm Ad and Thamud and Fir'aun, they were punished either with wind, Allah sent a wind that destroyed them, or an earthquake that cracked the earth and swallowed them up, or with the parting of the Red Sea and drowning. But those who said that there is a ma'na majazi, there is a metaphorical meaning, said that yes, these people were punished with wind, earthquake, and drowning, but the moral of it is the consequences of corruption on earth and injustice and despotism. Is that the asasul mulk al-adl, the basis for building any mulk, any power, any sovereign, is justice. You deviate from justice, the consequences will be like being overtaken in a drowning or an earthquake or an overwhelming wind. So the destruction that befalls injustice, that befalls people from the consequences of injustice, doesn't necessarily have to be a blowing wind or an earthquake or drowning. But the practical effect, the tahluka, the being cast into ruin. So that's why when Allah talks to the early Muslims and says, if you do not maintain the sadaqah, if you do not maintain jihad, that is casting yourself onto ruin. What Allah is alluding to here are the rules of that are the rules that govern history and social reality and historical reality that are every bit as constant and stable as the rules of nature themselves. So that is why when you read in Islamic literature and they tell you that we foresee the consequences of injustice, that injustice will result in ruin, they see that as part of the social laws that created. Justice maintains mulk, maintains states or societies. Injustice, corruption, and ifsad fil ard, corrupting through despotism and injustice, results in ruin as part of the laws that God dictated. Okay, so here in the translation, who tyrannized the land and increased corruption therein, so thy Lord poured upon them the scourge of punishment. So that's all, we've dealt with that. Truly thy Lord lies in ambush. I don't like that. In ambush is not. Inna rabbaka la bil mirsad. In ambush is not an mirsad comes from the word rasada. And rasada means to keep watch over something in a meticulous and systematic way. So when you say inna rabbaka la bil mirsad, means that Allah is ever watchful and aware and capable of delivering punishment. Now, many commentators said the punishment is not just on this earth as in allowing you to suffer the consequences of tyranny and oppression and injustice, but also in the hereafter. If I would sum up this very first portion that calls upon you to reflect upon the laws of nature, the Fajr, the Layal Ashr, the sacred time, and وَاللَّيْلِ إِذَا يَسْرِ, and the movement of the night, or what moves in the night either, the laws of history and sociology. Tyranny results in destruction. If you equate yourself with the singular, if you make your rulers equal to God, if you imagine yourself as a nation, as a race, as a people, as singular and unique, you give yourself privileges that you deny others, the results are foretold and already known. And that the results are part of the namus, part of the laws of creation that God has weaved into existence. Furthermore, rest assured that even if you don't feel the consequences in your here now, in your life on this earth, in the hereafter, the consequences will be waiting for you. Nothing escapes the watch of God. And that's what bil mirsad means, that nothing escapes God's watchful eyes. Now, note here, and I go back to the theme of accountability, because what the Quran is telling its audience is that don't think that you exist in vain. Whatever is done on this earth, there is a scale of justice that has to be fulfilled. And the myth that you can do something and it has no consequences for you and others is exactly that, a myth. Okay, so I just want to make sure that I didn't miss anything before we move on. Okay. Now, in again, classics, typical of the style of the early Meccan surahs, there is a shift at this point from the larger phenomena of existence, the meta picture, to a micro picture within the heart and mind of human beings. So it invited you to reflect upon the larger picture of nature, to understand the singularity of Allah, and to reflect upon the movement of history and sociological laws. But then it takes you to the individual level, the level of your own private being, your own consciousness, to tell you how the micro is related to the macro, or how the macro is related to the micro. To put it simply, well, if you're going to start with yourself, what is it within yourself that leads to the type of arrogance where human beings forget accountability, the type of arrogance that lead to human beings forgetting consequences, the type of arrogance that leads to human beings becoming forgetting about nature and the laws of creation. How does that meta view relate to the micro view? فأما الإنسان إذا ما ابتلاه ربه فنعمه فأكرمه فيقول ربي أكرمن وأما إذا ما ابتلاه فقدر عليه رزقه يقول ربي أهانن. So now it goes to the individual level. Let me see how these. We're getting to 7:15. Okay. So, as for human beings, whenever their Lord tests them and honors them and blesses them, they say, "My Lord has honored me." And as for whenever God tries them and straightens their provisions, they say, "My Lord has abased me." Nay, but you honor not the orphan. And so on. And then it goes on, nor you urge the feeding. So let's just focus. فأما الإنسان إذا ما ابتلاه ربه فأكرمه ونعمه وأما الإنسان إذا ما ابتلاه ربه فقدر عليه رزقه. So now, when it shifts to the individual level, it alerts the recipients of the Quran to a paradigm shift that for early Muslims were very important, and for us as Muslims, if we truly believe it, becomes very important. That whatever you have is a test from Allah. Your life is a test. Whether it is good or bad, both are a test from Allah. So what is the problem with human psychology? The problem with human psychology is that when God gives human beings generously, God allows human beings to thrive, like Ad and Thamud and Fir'aun, to be rich and powerful and whatever it counts as good in life. They are tempted to believe that this means that God is pleased with them, and that this means that they are in a good position vis-a-vis God and the cosmos. At the same time, when God denies them, they believe that this is an indication that God might be angry at them. So But in reality, both are a test. There is no correlation between wealth and power and God's pleasure and displeasure. And in fact, and that's the paradigm shift, and in fact, the fact that your life on earth is going well, and you're doing well, and you are wealthy and thriving and free of problems, could be an indication that that your relationship with God is horrible. And the fact that you are going through an enormous amount of hardship could be an indication that you are very close to Allah. Now, don't think we're all raised with these ideas, but try to imagine the impact on the very first believers as they're told there must be another way for you to look at your relationship, to understand your relationship with the divine, with the singular, other than material wealth. Material wealth is not an indication of whether you are in good standing or not good standing with Allah. Something else is a measure of that. What that something else is a good stopping point. So we can stop at a cliffhanger. So, yeah. Okay, so let's pray. So we pray, and so we're just gonna take 5 minutes to pray, and then we'll do Q&A if there's any.
Right. So if we'll start with questions related to the surah. So if anyone has questions, please send them in the comments on the YouTube, the live stream, and then after that we'll see how much time we have left.
Oh, look at those. Oh, look.
Oh my God, so precious.
You see, I think they're proof of the divine.
Yes.
The human beings, somehow their consciousness becomes translated into a sense of being and purpose. And that move from consciousness to being and purpose is impossible without a creator. And with animals that are all instincts, especially instincts that are not consistent with self-preservation, are impossible without a creator. I mean, the new atheists are insane, but you know, before you ask me the questions, if there are any, أما الإنسان إذا ما ابتلاه ربه فأكرمه ونعمه يقول ربي أكرمن وأما إذا ما ابتلاه فقدر عليه رزقه فيقول ربي أهانن. This is probably one of the hardest emotional challenges to human beings, because our nature, by just the way we are made, is that when things are not going right for us, immediately we think the first inclination, if we're believers, is that God must be angry at us. Imagine the hardest test is that to lose a loved one. Now, the Prophet ﷺ lost so many loved ones. And when I try to put myself in his shoes, and I think of the number of children that he lost in his lifetime, a harder test is not possible. The level of poverty and need. I mean, one of the saddest developments in history is that when they tore down the Prophet's home, because the Prophet's home was so humble, so simple, to imagine that someone who he lived his entire life in this extremely limited space, and yet that level of poverty did not interfere in his relationship with Allah, is a lesson that we all badly needed. Anyway, okay, so is there any questions?
There are. Okay.
Guys, can I text you my question?
Yes, please do. You can text me. Okay, sorry, I have to wear a number of hats now because my assistant left.
Where did Chief go?
I think he had to call somebody or something. I think he had to talk to somebody. Okay, so I just want to comment. Somebody asked a question here about whether or not hijab is fard, and how do we understand people who choose not to wear it versus those who do. I mean, we've talked about, the professor has written a lot about the hijab, and he gave a very long 4-part halaqa on the evidence and issue of the hijab. So I want to make sure that we don't take time to cover things that have been already covered elsewhere.
Tell them how to find the halaqas on hijab.
So sure. So it's on SoundCloud. We have the audio for the hijab halaqas, and also we have a lot of writing where the professor is actually answering questions about hijab and issues a fatwa about it. So addresses that question specifically on the searchforbeauty.org website. There's a section there called fatwas off the homepage. You'll find it on the right-hand nav bar, and so you can find a lot of the communications there. Oops. And just to say, so when the professor first sat down, he was actually responding to doggies on. we always invite our dear friends here to be our audience, even though we have a lot of people coming in, and so they've got their dogs on their lap. So it's really important. One of our goals, my goal in particular, but I mean both of our goals, is to really elevate the position of dogs, especially with Muslims. So I really try to take every opportunity to give a shout out to these beautiful creatures. And so I wanted to make sure people understood what he was responding to, because we have 2 very cute 4-legged attendees to the halaqa today. So we didn't want to let that pass. Okay, so let's see. It's important to know the location of these qa'ins, Q-A-I-M-S, that are mentioned in the Quran, or only the wisdom behind it, or both. I'm sorry, I don't know what a qa'im is. Right now, sorry, someone just joined. So we're starting with questions related to the surah that we covered. Okay.
Okay, so qa'im, I'm not sure. Is the person on the line?
Yeah.
Ask them what they mean by qa'im, because the surah doesn't use the word qawama, or it refers to dhil awtad, and he might.
Nations.
He means aqwam, not qa'im.
That's how. Sorry,
Okay.
that's how it's spelled. I don't know
Okay.
Arabic, so sorry.
Okay. Oh, okay. No, yeah, it is. That's a good question. Efforts to locate the Qawm Ad or Qawm Thamud. I don't want to be one of these arrogant academics who say whether something is impossible or not possible. But as far as we know, as of now, with the fact that Islamic archaeology is so backwards, everything I've read in archaeology, and I went through a period where I was reading quite a bit in archaeology. It dawned on me that our archaeological interests are nearly appendages to the West. If the West is interested in something, then and our knowledge of archaeology, it results largely from training in the West. So all the archaeologists that work in the Islamic world have been trained in the West, and their historical interests are from the West, which means that unfortunately or fortunately, there is no archaeology that is driven by the Quran in a similar way that there is an archaeology that is driven by the Bible. I mean, think of Israeli archaeology. Israeli archaeology is completely biblically driven. It's true that Israeli archaeologists don't always end up confirming what is in the Bible, but the funding, the search, is sparked by the narratives of the Bible. There is also a substantial archaeology that is driven by Christian Bible or Christian interests in the Bible. Nothing like that exists in the Islamic world, which means that we really have no clue as of now where Qawm Ad or Qawm Thamud were, other than the historical narratives. And the historical narratives are so conflicting and inconsistent that it's really difficult to come out with any serious conclusions. When you have something like Qawm Ad, and you have some sources that tell you they were in Damascus, and some sources tell you that they were in Yemen, and other sources tell you that they were in Arabia, and other sources tell you they were in Alexandria, and other sources tell you that they were in today's Jordan. Unless you have some archaeological or anthropological research, it really just becomes very conflicting. Now, but I agree with a lot of what theologians said, that it doesn't seem that their geographical positions is really important to the theological message. The theological message, the moral lesson, is that to know what, interestingly, for those who watch programs like Ancient Aliens and stuff like that, to me, I'm always struck by the fact that these programs end up confirming what the Quran says, in that there were people in the lost history of the world, the history before history, that were technologically advanced, and that they were so technologically advanced to a degree that would surprise us. In these programs about ancient aliens, they find them so technologically advanced that they say, oh, well, there must have been aliens, because they couldn't have been so technologically advanced, and their history has been completely lost. Well, they're wrong. I mean, it doesn't have to be aliens. It could very well be that people like the Aztecs and the Incas and the civilizations of Mesopotamia and Yemen and so on were, in fact, remarkably technologically advanced and had dominated the earth and had reached great heights in their civilization, all to have it come crashing down because of their despotism and injustices and inequities. And the lesson is very powerful. I mean, imagine on Surah Al-Fajr, I often read Surah Al-Fajr and I think this way. Imagine if the wealth, why did Allah give Arabia, forget Saudi Arabia, Arabia, give Arabia and the lands of the former Muslim caliphate, where the Khilafah used to be. Why did Allah give them so much oil? Imagine if all this hard currency, all these billions and billions of dollars, were used instead for consumption and luxury items and pleasure items, and used to fill the coffers of former colonial powers, used to uphold the British economy and the French economy and the Danish economy. Imagine if all this cash was actually used for just and equitable purposes. Would there be any doubt that you would have a thriving Islamic civilization? Perhaps the like of which history had not seen. I am talking, that amount of wealth could have created an Islamic civilization that exceeds the achievements of the Ottoman civilization. Logic, just look at the amount of money Allah gave. We had colonialism. Right as colonialism was ended, was a period of domination, Allah gave us this gift, this tons and tons and tons of free money. In fact, the key to energy in the entire world, at the time when no one in the world, we didn't have Russian petroleum yet, we didn't have American petroleum yet, we had Arabian petroleum. Arabian petroleum made the cars and the tanks and the airplanes, the early cars and the early tanks and the airplanes of World War I and World War II move. They were the source of energy for the entire world. Colonialism fought World War I and World War II largely on the basis of Arab oil, or Middle Eastern oil, or Muslim oil. To be honest, Muslim oil. But the fact that Muslims did what Qawm Ad and Thamud and Fir'aun do, they made the rulers into gods. The king of Saudi Arabia is a god. You can't second guess him. You can't defy him. You can't disobey him. You can't, they're God. The ruler of Egypt is a god. The ruler of Syria is a god. The ruler of Iraq was a god. The fact that they, and all that wealth was wasted. وَإِنَّ رَبَّكَ لَبِالْمِرْصَادِ. Do you think God, who is watchful and who makes people suffer the consequences, aren't we seeing the consequences right now? Aren't we seeing the mess that Muslims are in? These are the consequences. From a theological perspective, you had colonialism. You were dominated. I gave you the key to overcome colonialism, to rebuild the Islamic civilization, to create khilafah unlike anything history had seen. The entire world would have had to depend on you for energy and for an unbelievable amount of wealth. Enough wealth to make every Muslim on the face of this earth well off. No need, no poverty, nothing. What destroyed us? Inequity. Bad distribution of wealth. You have Sheikh this and Sheikh this who have billions of dollars in their bank accounts in Switzerland and France. Billions of dollars. While other Muslims can't even... Isn't this the story of Ad and Thamud? Didn't the Quran basically tell us what we are living? So when I find these Muslims who oh, why are we going? Everything is so miserable that they start losing faith in Allah. Well, really, what you're losing faith is in yourself, because you are just living the consequences of Ad and Thamud. You are living the consequences of allowing that gift from Allah to be in the hands of king this and queen this and prince this and princess this. You're living the consequences. You adopted the mythology of blind obedience. Whatever the ruler says goes. That's Allah's will. Even if they torture you, even if they whip you, you have to obey. Okay, well, here are the consequences. Isn't this the singularity that Allah talked about? What is the difference between Qawm Fir'aun and this despotism and oppression? So understand the moral lesson, because the moral lesson is present and overwhelming. It is so relevant to us that it speaks to our generations that are basically the lost generations. The generations that are suffering the consequences of Inna Rabbaka Labil Mirsad. And the challenge, either we try to fix things, or further generations will perish like the generations before them.
Okay, quick question. May I ask which pharaoh was around during Moses' time?
I actually was sort of, as I was telling you the story of the Egyptian museum, I was trying to remember which pharaoh it was that Egyptian antiquities guide who had she actually had the masters, and she was like, she told me the entire story, and I can't remember it now, but I can find out. I mean, I can easily find out, because after I talked to her, I went home. We lived in Roxy, and I made notes about my conversation with her. So I'm tempted to say it was Ramses II, but I don't want to be committed to that, because he was a rather distinctive because of the color of his hair, and also when his body was found, he was frozen in a strange physical position, was his hand was sort of raised, and it is said that he died or he drowned as his hand was raised as the water was coming at him. When I actually saw the body, and the hand was raised a bit like that, like this, and it was frozen in that position. I'll look it up, inshallah. I can't remember right now. I should have predicted that someone might ask this question and looked it up yesterday, but I didn't.
Okay, next question. We discussed the idea of reflecting upon creation to know God, and the verse then transitions to the issue of balwa. I'm not sure if I'm saying that right.
Yeah.
Which some have taken.
Test.
Okay, which some have taken to be not referring to testing, but of a process of becoming, to know oneself and God. Related to this is the issue of our purpose, which you just mentioned. Having just read Alistair MacIntyre's book, After Virtue, I've been thinking about the issue of the human telos and how virtues and ethics are integral to our telos. This is a huge concept, but I was wondering whether you could offer some brief remarks on our telos, and if possible, how virtues fit into our telos.
Yeah, I actually, when I wrote Speaking in God's Name, if I remember correctly, it's in either Speaking God's Name or in Reasoning with God. I don't remember which book, but one of my books I cite to the After Virtue, that particular book, because like you, I saw the very clear parallels with Islam. And I very much do believe that the transformation that the Quran, the dynamic that the Quran calls for, and the transformation that the Quran tries to create within human beings is not simply thinking of things as I am being tested so that I endure in patience. Because every time that patience is mentioned, it is also mentioned coupled with al-amal salih, which is effectively virtues, the performance of virtuous acts. And even in Surah Al-Fajr and in so many of the other surah, immediately when it mentions the defect within us, that we think that wealth is equal to an indication of our spiritual state, and that's a natural inclination, but it immediately tells us, no, you're what defines you are your virtuous deeds, whether you take care of the yatim, the orphans, whether you feed the needy, and that is the typical Quranic dynamic, is that it is constantly saying it is your acts of virtues that will define you and define your status with God. It is not simply your ability to endure. Yes, sabr is very important. Yes, patience is important. But what do you add? So, without getting into, because I mean, I'm, if we open this door of, I think, if anyone can remind, I think I wrote about human telos in one of my writings. I don't remember which. Do you remember?
I think speaking in God's name.
Was it speaking in God's name?
I bet it could be both, too. But I seem to remember speaking God's name.
Okay. Anyway,
Sorry?
Was it the great huh?
No, I think speaking in God's name. Or reasoning with God.
yeah, it's horrible when you can't remember. Anyway, yeah, I mean the issue of the question of that needs, because while we have a great deal of classical material that have been written on human virtues and the virtues that should define the purpose of a human being, it has not been translated by modern theorists into the language of modern day philosophy. And so, I've had this experience with several philosophy students. They start out with reading Western philosophy, and then when they go back to Islamic sources, they can't figure out. So they open either simple books about Kutub Makarim al-Akhlaq, and in there they don't find philosophical sophistication, or they open books of Kalam, like Ibn Taymiyyah's reply to Greek logicians, and they can't decipher the language enough to be able to tie it to modern discussions about telos and virtues and human purpose. And so things are left there. And I think it would be a great, I mean, that's a huge area of deficiency. To go back and reread the classical sources and recast this material in language that engages modern philosophy and modern philosophical discourses. As far as I know, we don't have anyone who's done that. Even someone like Zaki Naguib Mahmoud, the Egyptian fellow, or some of the Egyptian Arab philosophers, they're either completely secular or they are simply grafting Western philosophy onto the Islamic tradition in a very superficial and unreal fashion. So they'll grab this sentence or this concept and say, oh, well, that's equal to, let's say, the idea of telos in modern Western philosophy, without working out analytically the connotations of this argument. The closest person that I know who's actually done it, done some of it in a real way, is Surush. But Surush, of course, belongs to a certain Western philosophical school, and he seems to be very wedded to it. So anyway, okay, is that good enough?
Okay.
Okay.
Thumbs up. All right. So I think that's all the questions we have that came through on this surah. There's a question. I know this is kind of a big question, but I'll throw it out there. What is the distinction between being a Muslim and a mu'min? Fred Donner claimed the original identity of Muslims was mu'minun, according to the Quran. And maybe you can just touch upon, if you've talked about it elsewhere.
Well, okay. The Quran itself, it expressly says that in addressing certain converts to Islam who had converted as Muslims, and it tells them, don't say that you are mu'minun, say that you are muslimun, and meaning that you really are just Muslim, but you don't have iman in your heart. So it's criticizing, and there's a context to this verse, a historical context, and that's what Fred Donner is referring to. In Islamic theology, there is a distinction between a Muslim and a mu'min. A Muslim is someone who has taken the Shahada, and at a time when citizenship was defined according to your religious identity, being a Muslim from not being a Muslim defined your citizenship as far as Muslim countries were concerned, or Muslim dynasties and empires were concerned. So, literally, the question when you traveled from one location to another, the question was as to how to categorize you legally, as to what access to courts you have, as to what taxes you paid, as to what rights you had to own land or rent land, as to whether you would serve in the army or not serve in the army, as to what jurisdiction the police had over you. All types of things were defined by whether you were categorized as Muslim or not Muslim. And there is no doubt that many people categorize themselves as Muslim for the purposes of what we today call citizenship, but what for at their time called affiliation, for their official affiliation, for better or for worse. And there were many reasons that people could want to be affiliated as Muslim or has Muslim citizenship, but whether you had iman or not, that's a separate matter. And not every Muslim is a mu'min, but every mu'min is a Muslim, in the sense that that Iman is, and I don't want to get into Tawheed al-Rububiyyah and Tawheed al-Uluhiyyah and all that stuff, but at a minimum, that what has, you're not just officially a Muslim, you're not just a person who has taken the Shahada, but you're a person who, in fact, has a genuine belief that you are from Allah and that you are returned to Allah, that a genuine desire to submit to Allah, and that desire to submit has been translated into not just your system of belief, but the actions that affirm that belief. So at a minimum, you follow the 5 pillars of Islam, you fast, you pay your zakah, you do your psalm, and you, in fact, beyond that, you are guided by the desire to achieve the full meanings of submission to Allah. Now, of course, submission to Allah could be understood in a very literal form, or in the form of virtue. So there are those who believe that, well, I submit to Allah as long as I think of everything as halal and haram in a technical sense. Do I put nail polish, or when I do my wudu, I don't put nail polish. But those who believe that I don't submit to Allah unless I feel Allah in my heart and I feel Allah's presence everywhere I go. Both are Iman. Both are Iman. But what levels of Iman is where it gets, we start having serious discussions. That Iman itself has gradations and levels between those who don't know God other than a sovereign who commands, who rewards and punishes, and those who are, when Allah says, وَهُوَ مَعَكُمْ أَيْنَمَا كُنْتُمْ, Allah is with you wherever you go. There are people who that translates to, well, I don't feel Allah, but I know that Allah sees me and will either reward me or punish me, and I don't want to be punished and I want to be rewarded, so I adjust my behavior accordingly. And there are those who say, no, Allah is with me wherever I go, and I feel Allah. I feel Allah's presence. Regardless of punishment or reward, I feel the divine presence. And both are Iman. There's so much more you can say about this, but...
Okay, so I think we have time maybe just for one more question, and I'm going to pull, actually we did get an email this week, and the professor wanted me to remind him about this question, that he would answer it in the Halaqa. So I'll read you the email. It says, I am studying interior design in an art school, and there I have a course of drawing in which we draw objects, nature, etc. But now we have started to draw human faces and figures, and I know that we aren't allowed to do that in Islam. Can you kindly tell me what shall I do in this case, as it is part of my course and I have to do it, but it is also not allowed in Islam? How shall I repent, or no repentance is necessary, as I am helpless in this regard?
I don't know who told you drawing faces in Islam is haram. But there's no prohibition. That's absolutely not true. The only thing that we have, or where the debate occurs, is about us creating human figures. I mean, the Rasm al-Ajsam or Sun al-Ajsam, which was understood as statutes. Statue.
Not statutes.
I say it. Huh?
Statutes are legal.
Oh, statutes are the statues. Okay, but from you can even look into Islamic art, and you will see that Muslims were drawing faces from as soon as the Islamic art developed. It's a remnant. When Wahhabism, Saudi Islam was still Wahhabi, Saudi Wahhabi scholars would say that drawing in all its forms of human bodies and human faces, drawing of even animal figures, is all haram. Now, these same Saudi scholars that said that have now reversed course. So all of them went from it's haram. After MBS came to power, they all told us no, it's not haram anymore. So, and these are the only moderns that I know of that used to say it was haram, and they all overnight discovered that they were in error. But the origin of the thing is that the Prophet ﷺ, there's hadith that talks about surah, and that whoever creates a surah, a figure of a human being or animal, will come in the hereafter. I mean, that's what the hadith says. And will come in the hereafter, and Allah will tell them to put a soul in the figure they drew, and when they fail to do so, Allah will punish them. Now, that hadith is weak. In some versions, it's marfu'. In other words, it has gaps in transmission, and in other versions, it's simply weak. In its chain of transmissions, it has non-thiqat. And even the jurists who dealt with the issue of surah said that the refrain, the concern about creating human figures or animal figures was that Islam, among those who had converted to Islam, they used to be idol worshippers, and that in early Islam there was a concern that idol worshipping would return easily, that people would revert back to idol worshipping. Since the writings of people like Muhammad Abdu and Rafa' al-Tahtawi and Sheikh al-Alusi and from Syria and so many others, because we don't have any strong textual sources that tell us drawing is haram, and because we know that in fact Muslims do have in their art, they drew figures and they drew faces, and you can look up Islamic art and see it for yourself, and because there is no concern that we are going to you're not going to draw someone's face and the next day you'll find people worshipping your drawing. That's not a concern, and that's not a worry. Reversion to idol worshipping, we have much more to worry about in terms of the way we worship money and the way we worship luxury and we're more likely to worship a fancy car like a BMW than to worship one of your drawings. So it's not haram. Do your drawing at art school, excel in your art, be the best artist you can, produce amazing art that invites to Allah's way and that it honors Muslims and represents Muslims well, and you will be rewarded by Allah. Whoever taught you it's haram mistaught you. They're close-minded and they don't know the jurisprudential tradition that they represented to you.
Alhamdulillah. Thank you. So with that, then we'll conclude for today. And I just want to remind you, in terms of our next meeting, of course, Friday, we'll have the next khutbah. And then the 20th, which is Saturday, June 20th at 4 p.m., inshallah, we will do the first new Quran Halaqa.
And then the next meeting to finish, inshallah, Surah Al-Fajr will be July the 11th, which is the weekend after the July 4th weekend. And then I think what we will look to do is probably 2 weeks after that, on July the 25th, do our next Q&A. So feel free to send me any questions, and I've already received a lot of questions, so thank you very much. And I apologize to those whose questions we didn't get to today. But inshallah, we will get there. So thank you for joining us.
My plan, inshallah, when we come back to Surah Al-Fajr, is to finish Surah Al-Fajr and start Surah Al-Ghashiyah.
Okay. Inshallah. Very good. Okay.
Inshallah.
So thank you so much, and inshallah, we'll see you Friday. Okay.
Okay, assalamu alaikum
Press the
everyone.
first